All right, we're going to talk about the axial skeleton. Axial skeleton is going to consist of the skull, spinal cord, the sacrum, the coccyx, and this bone right here called the hyoid bone, as well as the ribs and the sternum. Let's get into that. The neck is properly called the cervicals. There are 7 cervical bones in the neck. Below there, the next region is the dorsals, or properly called the thoracics. There are 12 thoracics. Down here we come to the low back, or lumbars, and there are 5 lumbars. The lumbars sit on top of the sacrum, which is this triangle bone that the hips hook into. And then below the sacrum is the coccyx. So there's 7, 12, and 5. There are 12 thoracic bones. There are 12 pairs of ribs. The ribs hook into the thoracic bones. The ribs come all the way around front and then hook up to the sternum. The sternum has 3 bones that come together. We have this pointy part down here called the xiphoid process, this narrow part called the sternal body, and then where it gets wide is the manubrium. These ribs come around and hook to it. Now, when there's a 1-to-1 connection, one rib with one piece of cartilage going to the sternum, that is a true rib. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 true ribs. When the ribs share a piece of cartilage coming in, like these 3 right here, it's not true, it's false. So these are false. And then we have our 2 bottom ribs 11 and ribs 12, which are floating ribs. They don't have any cartilage going around. And since they don't have any 1-to-1 connection with the sternum, they fall under the false category. But they're also called floating ribs because they don't have any cartilage at all. We have our shoulder blade, or our scapula. This big ridge running right here is posterior. The big ridge running right here is the scapular spine. The scapular spine ends, gets fat, and becomes the acromion process. Going to disarticulate this. We have our scapular spine, our acromion process. Now our arm bone goes in here, or our humerus goes in here, and this is the glenoid cavity. Acromion process, glenoid cavity, and anterior to that is our coracoid process. Our coracoid process. That's what I want you to know on the scapula. Coming around here, we have the collarbone, properly called the clavicle. The clavicle has 2 ends. It has one end that hooks to the sternum, and the other one that hooks to the acromion process of the scapula. So we call the end that hooks to the sternum the sternal end. It is big and fat. We call the end that hooks to the acromial process the acromial end. It is more blade-like. All right, I'll expect you to know which end is which. On the cervicals, I'm going to take out the top 2 neck bones. Cervicals, all the vertebrae are named from superior to inferior. This is C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7. Then we get into T1, T2, then we get into L1, L2. This bone right here is the hyoid bone. We're going to disarticulate C1 and C2. Nothing looks like this. So this bone has such special function that it has its own name, and it's called the atlas. The skull sits on top of the atlas. The atlas, or C1, sits on top of C2. No other bone looks like this. This is superior, this is anterior. This little nub right here on C2 is called the dens, or the odontoid process. Just write dens down. This is so special too that it gives it its own name, and this is also called axis. C1 revolves around the dens of axis. So C1 and C2, I expect I can lay this on a table and you guys will be able to name which one it is. We have our hips. Each one is called, the whole thing together is the pelvis, but each one alone is called the coxal. I'm going to disarticulate this one. We have the tops of our hips right here, and this is called the iliac crest. It's called the iliac crest because this bone The coxal is made of 3 bones that fuse together. This top big blade-like bone is called the ilium. This curved bone, which is posterior, is the bone we sit on, or our butt bone, and that's called the ischium. And this pointy bone comes up right in front right here, and it's called a pubis. This hole right here is the obturator foramen, and the socket where our thigh bone goes into is called the acetabulum.